Good morning, friends. Now, in this session, we are going to have a look at the language of Midsummer Night's Dream, prose versus verse. Like Shakespeare's other plays, the language of Midsummer consists of both verse and prose. Also, like Shakespeare's other plays, the division between verse and prose in Midsummer follows class lines, with the lower class commoners demonstrating less refinement in their language. Thus, the Athenian nobles and the fairies typically speak in verse, whereas the mechanicals typically speak in prose. Shakespeare frequently uses the contrast between these modes of speaking for humor, as when Titania declares her love for the donkey headed bottom in sumptuous verse, only to be answered in Bottom's common speech. The only instance where this class division between verse and prose gets reversed occurs during the performance of Pyramus and Thisbe, where the mechanicals speak in verse and the nobles comment on the play in prose. Here again, Shakespeare uses the contrast of comedic effect, emphasizing just how absurd the results are when commoners attempt to adopt a nobler register. Shakespeare also uses different types of verse to create contrast between the human and fairy nobility, whereas the human nobles tend to speak in iambic pentameter, the fairies tend to speak in slightly shorter lines of iambic tetrameter. These shorter lines have a rhythm more closely associated with ballads and other song forms, and Shakespeare links the sing song quality of the meter to the fairies' carefree, even mischievous nature. One particularly powerful example of how Shakespeare uses differences in meter to meaningful effect comes near the end of Act 3 when Puck removes Lysander's spell. Puck begins by speaking in very short, rhyming lines. When thou wakest, thou takest true delight in the sight. As he continues, however, his lines get longer, ending with a line of unrhymed prose. The man shall have his mare again, and all shall be well. Of all the play's characters, Puck most represents the shape-shifting magical world of the forest, and his progression from tight, rhymed verse so long, unrhymed prose signifies the end of fantasy and the return of the mundane. Now we'll have a look at the point of view. Although A Midsummer Night's Dream opens with Theseus and Hippolyta, Shakespeare does not focus the action of the play solely or even primarily from the point of view of the Athenian rulers. Instead, the point of view alternates between three storylines: the mechanicals preparing to put on a play, the fairies making mischief, and the lovers quarreling, with Theseus and Hippolyta returning at the end. Throughout the play, the point of view shifts from scene to scene, so we get equal insight into the motivations of all the characters. The audience alone understands the action from every side. For example, we know that Puck has enchanted Bottom and replaced his head with a donkey's head. The other mechanicals, however, don't know about the enchantment, so react with fear when they see Bottom, and Bottom himself doesn't know he now looks like a donkey, so is puzzled when his friends run away from him. This device, where the audience knows more than the characters, is called dramatic irony. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare often employs dramatic irony so that the audience understand the action better than any of the characters. Shakespeare shares the point of view equally among all the characters so that all the characters appear equally sympathetic to us. Almost all of the characters suffer as a result of fairy enchantments in one way or another. At the same time, because one character's point of view is not privileged over any other, the audience doesn't identify with any one character. The action remains distanced and the audience never becomes deeply emotionally invested in the character's fate. The distancing effect enables us to remain amused by the action and laugh even when the characters themselves are deeply distraught. By comparison, in Shakespeare's tragedy Romeo and Juliet, which the play within the play in Midsummer alludes to, the point of view privileges Romeo and Juliet's experience. The audience comes to care deeply about these characters and feels devastated when bad things happen to them. By moving the point of view rapidly between a large cast of characters, Shakespeare keeps Midsummer rooted firmly in the comic genre and prevents us from caring too deeply about any of the characters or taking the action too seriously. Now we'll have a look at the tone. A Midsummer Night's Dream is primarily a humorous play, but it also presents a greater variety of tone than may at first appear. The opening scene, for instance, begins with a conflict that has very serious stakes when Theseus forces Hermia to choose between an unwanted marriage with Demetrius and either life as a nun or death if she rejects that marriage. The audience may wonder if they are watching a tragedy rather than a comedy. Hermia isn't the only character faced with a difficult love situation. Lysander risks losing his true love, Hermia. So does Helena, who longs for Demetrius. The strife extends to the fairy realm as well, where a jealous rift has opened between Oberon and Titania. But by the conclusion of Act 5, all of the lovers have settled on their matches. The amorous discord has resolved into marriage, and Oberon closes the play with a magical blessing for the well matched lovers. Whereas the play begins with a serious tone, it ends on a romantic, reassuring tone. Though the play does flirt with seriousness, romance, and enchantment, the overriding tone of Midsummer is humorous, even satiric. Shakespeare threads humor throughout the play, and particularly in the scenes featuring Bottom and the other mechanicals as they rehearse their adaptation of Priamus and Thisbe. Aside from being amusingly incompetent Thespians, Bottom and company lack the formal eloquence of the Athenian nobles and the fairies, often mispronouncing and even misusing words. The comic relief of the mechanicals, which Shakespeare first introduces in Act 1st, Scene 2nd, amplifies into full on farce in Act 2nd through 4, when fairy mischief creates much chaos in a very short amount of time. The farce of the mixed up lovers functions to alleviate the emotional gravity that characterizes the play's opening, and the amplification of confusion leads to a satisfying and romantic resolution in the final act. In the end, the variation in tone lends Midsummer's a greater degree of emotional complexity than audiences might expect from a comedy. Now we'll have a look at the foreshadowing. Foreshadowing doesn't play a large role in a Midsummer Night's Dream, but in a few instances, characters suggest the nature of the action that follows. Most significantly, the play opens with a discussion of the troubles lovers often face. The course of the true love never did run smooth. Lysander says in Act 1st, Scene 1st. His observation essentially foreshadows everything that happens in the rest of the play. Now we'll have a look at Oberon and Titania's fight. In the play's first scene, Theseus provides the backstory to his relationship with Hippolyta. They weren't always lovers. In fact, he tells Hippolyta, I wooed thee with my sword and won thy love, doing thee injuries. The subtle discord between Theseus and Hippolyta in these opening lines foreshadows the dispute between Oberon and Titania, their counterparts in the fairy realm. Here Shakespeare intertwines the two realms into a complex relationship. Titania feels jealous of Oberon's affection for Hippolyta, and Oberon feels equally jealous of Titania's affection for Theseus. These are the examples of the play's interweaving of reality and fantasy, set up for audience the way the play juxtaposes human problems with fairy problems. Now we will have Lysander's abandonment of Hermia. In the final moments of Act 2nd, just after charmed Lysander leaves Hermia's side to pursue Helena, Hermia awakens from a nightmare in which a serpent devoured her heart as Lysander stood by and watched. The symbolism of Hermia's dream foreshadows Lysander's betrayal. Yet, despite the clear symbolic link between Hermia's dream and Lysander's abandonment, there remains something paradoxical about this example of foreshadowing. Specifically, Shakespeare reverses the usual chronology that foreshadowing requires. In this case, the foreshadowed event, Lysander's abandonment, actually precedes the event that foreshadows it, Hermia's dream. That is Hermia's dream. How then does this count as foreshadowing? It counts because Hermia will not actually find out that Lysander betrayed her until Act 3, Scene 2nd. Shakespeare makes this foreshadowing paradox work through the use of dramatic irony, in which the audience understands something that the characters don't. Now we'll have the rift between Hermia and Helena. In the play's opening scene, Hermia informs Helena of her plan to run away with Lysander, recalling the two women's girlhood friendship. And in the wood, where often you and I, upon faint primrose beds, were wont to lie, emptying our bosoms of their counsel swelled, there my Lysander and myself shall meet. This mention of the spot where Helena and Hermia used to spend time foreshadows the fact that Hermia plans to replace Helena in her affections with Lysander. The lines also foreshadow Helena's return to this spot in Act 2nd, Scene 2nd, where she will awaken the enchanted Lysander, causing him to fall in love with her instead of Hermia. This is all about A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. Thank you.